Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Lectionary Kickstart. We're sparking your thoughts for Sunday as you plan your sermon or teaching lesson. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordolo, here with Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Napsker. They're both professors of homiletics here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. You can hear all about us in our introductory episode, but trust me, they're pretty good preachers. Listeners, I know you'll hear noise in the background. We recently had a tornado go through campus, and the trees around the studio are being cut down, and they're grinding them. So just wanted to let you know what the noise is. Thanks for your patience. But let's get started. Peter, where are we in the church year?
We're at the fifth Sunday after Pentecost when we think about the mission of the church empowered by God's Spirit.
And David, what are the texts this week?
Texts are Leviticus 18, Colossians 1, Luke 10, and Psalm 41.
In the epistle reading, we read that we are delivered from the dominion of darkness. When you lose power at your house, do you use candles or flashlights?
I use a flashlight.
Okay.
Yep. And then I use the flashlight to light candles.
Yeah, candlelight is the best. Flashlights, I hate the fake lighting of flashlights. So as many candles as we can find.
Nice. The last time we lost power, I got my camping lantern out. Peter, I'm going to go with you.
Okay, I'm going to suggest preaching on the gospel reading from Luke chapter 10. The parable of the Good Samaritan. But I got to admit, I was a little bit torn on this because, you think about a parable that's as familiar as the Good Samaritan, and there's two ways to think about it, right? One thought is, this is so familiar, I should go somewhere else.
Okay.
I should go to a different text. And the other way to think about it is, this is so familiar, I should address it.
Right.
But I need to do it in a way that's maybe fresh or not so predictable, just because it's very well known. So, but I thought after I went back and forth a little bit, I think I would go after the Good Samaritan parable. So maybe to get us started, Jessica, would you read verses 36 and 37, just the very end of it?
Which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said. He said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise.
Okay, this is, of course, the last couple verses, what Jesus did with the parable to the people with whom he was speaking. I'm curious, are either of you familiar with Augustine's interpretation of this parable?
Oh, is this the allegorical one?
It's super allegorical.
Okay.
So, in the early church, some of the church fathers did all sorts of interesting things with narratives.
They were creative.
They were very creative. They were very allegorical sometimes. And so Augustine made a number of connections in this parable. He said that the wounded man on the side of the road was Adam, that Jerusalem was the heavenly city from which Adam fell. The thieves, you know who the thieves were?
No.
That beat up the guy in the story? Well, that's the devil who tempted Adam. And the priest and the Levite who passed by, that was the Old Testament law that can't save anybody.
Right, the law and the prophets, I thought.
Law and the prophets.
Yeah.
I'm getting this from Craig Blomberg, interpreting the parables.
Okay.
The Good Samaritan is?
Jesus.
Jesus is the Good Samaritan. The inn
is the church.
And the innkeeper? The innkeeper is Paul. Apparently, Paul's standing at the gates of the church. Who knows? At any rate, this I learned about that.
That's kind of fun. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting way to think about it. It's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit of a stretch to make all these connections. Mm-hmm. Okay, I can see why you might do that. But of all these connections, there's actually two that I think are kind of helpful that I would consider employing here. And the one is that the Good Samaritan being Jesus. I think that's worth thinking about. And the other one is the inn being the church.
Okay.
So what I'm going to suggest is looking at this parable with a little help from Augustine, but not quite as
elaborate
as he was. But the reason I think about this is I think there's a way to take seriously this parable in the context in which Jesus told it, and also help people read it well as Christians today. So I'm actually going to suggest that you retell the parable at least 2, maybe 3 times. Okay? So the first version of retelling the story would be to invite hearers to imagine themselves as the passers-by.
Okay.
Okay, the priest, the Levite, the Samaritan. This is kind of how it's written, because the person asked Jesus, who is my neighbor, and Jesus then told him this parable. So this would be kind of along the lines as is normally understood. And so, are you more like the priest, more like the Levite, more like the Good Samaritan? The point is, love your neighbor as yourself, like the Good Samaritan loved his neighbor. Of course, this would draw on the Leviticus 19 text. If you're going to pair it with the Old Testament, you could make a connection there. But then I would maybe ask, after telling the story, and maybe I would just tell the story and let it be. And then I would say, but what if instead of imagining ourselves as the Good Samaritan, we imagined ourselves as the person in the ditch? And then I would tell the parable from the perspective of the man who needed help. And this I might try to do a little bit more creatively. You'd have to, that's not the way the parable's told, really. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to be a little creative, and you'd think about, I would maybe draw on the hearer's experiences more in this version of the story, invite them to think about times where they've felt helpless or abandoned or alone.
I had a student once who did a sermon from the perspective of the man in the ditch, and the sermon opened with him waking up in the inn and finding out that he had been cared for, which was wonderful. And then he wanted to pay the guy back, and he found out it was a Samaritan, and he went ballistic because he didn't want to be loved by a Samaritan. And it was very powerful. It's a really interesting sermon.
Well, that's an interesting take, because that kind of approach would not invite you to think about who you give help to,
but who you receive
help from.
Right, yeah.
Because there's some times when our relationships are so messed up that certain people, we won't even receive help from them.
Right, I know, yeah.
And so maybe that would be, one of the ways. So if you think about the perspective of the man in the ditch, I like that idea, actually, waking up in the inn. That's pretty cool. But this would be a chance where you would invite the hearers to recognize their own helplessness, their own need, their own they're being dead in their sin. They're having no hope. And then Jesus, of course, would be the Good Samaritan in this telling of the story. But then I would maybe return to the original telling of the story and help people to think about, okay, as ones who have been rescued, saved, healed, delivered by Jesus, that does invite us to read this parable also then again as the passerby in maybe a different way. And so in this, if I was going to pair the first telling of the parable with Leviticus 19, maybe I would pair this third telling of the parable with the reading from Colossians 1. Would you read Colossians 1, 3-5, Jessica?
We always thank God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, when we pray for you, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and of the love that you have for all the saints, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven.
It's that last verse and a half. So Paul's telling the Colossians he gives thanks to God for them because he's heard of the love they have for all the saints because of the hope laid up for you in heaven. So it's no longer now the question that the man asked Jesus, what must I do to be saved? But the question would be, because we are saved, because we do have this hope, now what must we do? And Paul was giving thanks to the Colossians for the love that they had for all the saints. And so you kind of come back to it and then encourage the hearers to essentially what Jesus said at the end of the parable, go and do likewise, love as ones who have been loved by God in Christ.
A friend of mine, he said the only person that knew the whole story was the man in the ditch, and Jesus is telling the story, so this must have happened to him. Jesus must have been the man in the ditch, and people passed him by, and it was a Samaritan that took him to the inn. And I don't think that is the case, but wouldn't that be an interesting perspective to have?
Yeah, that's how Veltz takes it, if I remember correctly.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, and there's a nice painting of the Good Samaritan where you have the Samaritan helping the man in the ditch, but the man in the ditch is in a cruciform position, and he has a cut in his side, and he's bleeding in his hands and his feet. It's kind of an interesting painting, and it causes you to stop for a moment and think, well, what would happen if Jesus was the man in the ditch, and then, those who are saved are those who attach themselves to the one who's been cast out and killed. Yeah.
Well, that changes how we would view people who are on the side of the ditch, right? If you give a glass of water to one of these, you're giving it to me, right? Be careful who we despise in the ditch. Great. Thank you, Peter. David, what about you?
Well, I'm going to do the same thing as Peter.
Hooray! Oh, this will be great.
I thought the same thing. I was like, okay, should I do this? And then I'm like, Leviticus? I think I'm doing the parable of the Good Samaritan. Oh, gosh.
Well, it's hard to jump into Leviticus.
It is
just
hard.
Cold.
If
you're going to go into that's hard. So it's a tough pairing, I think.
I know.
And if we hear the story of the Good Samaritan in the gospel reading, how can you skip over it? A lot of us most of us have heard the story in some way, so it would be hard to skip it.
Well, good. Well, thank you. It makes me feel better with my choice. So if you could read, Jessica, verses 25 through 29.
And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor?
Okay. So I like thinking about the parable in terms of the challenge that Jesus has before him, right? So he has somebody, he has the man's head, but what he wants is his heart. So the man's got the knowledge, right? He's testing Jesus, and, Jesus is like, well, how do you read the commandments? And he gives the perfect explanation of the commandments. And then he wants to justify himself. And I'm not seeing that so much as he wants to save himself as he really wants to do this right. And he understands how to decide who's my neighbor, who's not my neighbor, so that I can come before God and say, here's what I've done. I understand your law. I put your law into practice, and I've done everything that I need to do. And you've got this guy, he's got it all up in the head, but there's just no heart. And so Jesus, to reach the heart, tells an imaginary story, right? And he tells an imaginary story to teach this man about love. The man knows about love. He actually says you're supposed to love God, you're supposed to love your neighbor, but the man probably is not actually loving. And so Jesus tells a story to awaken him to love. And so for me, the question would be kind of, how does this story awaken you to the power of love? That would be kind of the big question I would have.
What I think is helpful about this approach is that we don't tend to have trouble understanding the need to love.
Right.
The problem is not a cognitive problem.
Right.
The problem is we have a hard time loving.
Right.
As we should.
Right.
And so getting at that, that allows you to take a familiar parable that we kind of understand a little bit and get under the skin, you might say.
Yeah, and how does it get us to love? Right. Yeah. And so, we already know that kind of at the ending of the parable, what we learn is that you love the people that God puts into your life. When you're walking along the road, if there's somebody who's in a ditch, you don't keep walking. You stop and you show love. I mean, that's what the Samaritan does. And it's kind of an interesting thing. I every time you read these old parables or those ones you've read again and again, sometimes you hear something different. And there's a word that just stuck out for me when I was reading it. Jessica, could you read verse 31?
Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side.
I had never heard that before, by chance. I mean, we don't talk about things that are by chance.
Yeah.
It's not luck that this happened. It's not chance. It's not a coincidence. We have a God who knows the number of hairs on your head. He knows every time a sparrow falls, this God is ruling over all things. And we've got a priest walking on the road. By chance, he passes by. And it kind of makes me think, if I approach my life as if everything is by chance, I can keep walking. If I'm a priest and it's just by chance that this guy happens to be on the road, then that isn't a call from God for me to do anything. That's just bad luck, right? I mean, it's like, it's just by chance. But if everyone that I encounter is there for some reason of God's working, now every encounter is an opportunity to show love, right? And you think about the ministry of Jesus. How often did he do things while he was on the way to Jerusalem, right? He's going up to Jerusalem, and yet he encounters a funeral. He encounters, some lepers. And he's constantly doing his ministry, his acts of love, in response to the people that he encounters in his daily life. And so it's kind of this picture of love that is shown when you realize that your entire life is governed and guided by God. And the people you encounter are opportunities to love.
Well, that shapes the way people look at everything then.
Right.
And that's helpful because then they start looking at they look around in your life and you see who are the people who, quote unquote, by chance happen to be in your life. Well, maybe those are the neighbors that God is calling you to love.
Right. And who is this person I just ended up talking with at the store, and we ended up having a conversation because I had a store clerk one day. I was buying something, I forget what it was, and she's looking at it, and she's like, "Oh, my mom needs that too." And as we got into this discussion about our mothers and the things that they need and the things that they're buying for them, and it always kind of creeps you out that you're looking at the groceries I'm buying because I want to pretend that you don't see these, but they do. So you have, and these one thing, these aren't by chance. Maybe there's something that could be done, some love that could be shown there. So that would be the one thing that stuck out for me. And then the other thing that stuck out for me in the parable was at the very end, when the Samaritan pays the inn owner. And if you could read verse 35.
And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back."
That phrase struck me, "when I come back." That, okay, so he's traveling and he's going to return the same way and he's going to come back. But on the other hand, there's also this idea that perhaps he's going to come back to check on the guy, right? Mm-hmm. And that these acts of love that we do in response to the people in our lives, they can be part of a longer relationship. I'm getting kind of tired of, and I mean it's good, but it's like good and bad. I'm getting tired of what they call click here empathy, where I go to PetSmart and I'm buying some cat food, and it says on the screen, "Would you like to donate to Children's Miracle Network today? And do you want to donate to the tornado relief?" And and I donate, but it's like it's just this momentary thing that happens. I click here, and there's no relationship, right? And what I love about this picture of this guy's compassion is that the compassion leads him into all sorts of actions, right? He cares for him, he dresses his wounds, he puts him on his animal, he takes him to the inn, he pays at the inn, and then at the very end, he's saying, "I'm going to continue this relationship, and when I come back, if there's more I need to pay, I'm going to pay it." And it kind of helps me think about these chance encounters that we have with people out in the world that are the opportunity for love, and their opportunity for a love that builds into a relationship that lasts a long time. And so that'd be kind of how I would look at the parable, as trying to invite this lawyer away from a life where he understands everything and into a life where he's empowered by love, a love that looks at all of his life as designed by God, an opportunity to share love, and that these places where he shares love and the people he shares love with become opportunities for relationships that will last.
Well, and that invites, whether you go with Jesus as the Good Samaritan or you as an individual Christian, as a Good Samaritan, Jesus wants a relationship with us. He
Right.
will come back. He's not just a one and done. And
Right.
likewise, our relationships.
Right. Yeah, and even in the discipleship, right, in the passages where he says, I will come back and meet you in Galilee.
Right.
He makes that promise that he's going to meet them in Galilee, that the cross and the resurrection are not the end.
I was just thinking about this. The parables, Luke at least records these. And you got to imagine, because stories linger with you, you got to imagine the disciples remembering some of these stories like throughout their continuing ministry after Jesus. We're in the season of Pentecost after Jesus has left. And sometimes it is interesting to think about what would Luke have thought about this, or what would the disciples have thought about if they'd kind of recalled this parable later on. And sometimes that's kind of a helpful way to think about what a parable might do to you.
Right, yeah.
That's all for today. We have free resources to guide your next step in planning at concordiatheology.org. Check it out. While you're there, you'll also find episodes of our other podcast, Tangible, Theology Learned and Lived. Twice a month, I host conversations with Concordia Seminary faculty, and we talk about the ways in which their understanding of God and faith is real in their everyday lives. The show is for anyone who wants to deepen their theology. Tell your congregation about it. It's Tangible, Theology Learned and Lived. I also did a series of tangible episodes that go a step deeper. Dr. Robert Kolb and Dr. Joel Okamoto talk with me about issues that they think students and congregation members just are having trouble understanding. So they try to teach me. It's a new format. It's a short series. You can find that at concordiatheology.org. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordolo. Join us next week here at Lectionary Kickstart when Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Napsker will spark your thoughts for next Sunday.
On the Leviticus.
Leviticus?
It's hard to jump into Leviticus.